Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martin Loffers. I'm the Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media, but I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement, the European Quarterly, and also a bi-weekly newsletter and a huge LinkedIn group. I think it's, we have over 45,000 members worldwide. And last but not least, I'm an architect of the IT subway map, and we will discuss it later on. So we have a nice hour discussing S&OP, science or art, or both. So that's what we're going to discuss during this webinar. And with me, I have Jan Kraaijeveld. He is a sales director at Slimstock. Jan, welcome.
Thanks, Martijn. Good to have you and good to be on this webinar. As you said, 1 hour, we can talk freely about S&OP and inventory management and supply chain. So I think it will be let's say, it's hard for us to keep it within the hour, right?
Yes, it will. So, we've been working for Slimstock for almost 15 years. So what makes you tick in this business?
Yeah, Martijn, believe me or not, every time I go out, I love to talk about, let's say, supply chain planning, inventory management. I like to visit warehouses and to talk about this wonderful, let's say, area of supply chain. And it's still evolving, right? It's from inventory management to supply chain planning. There's such a big, let's say, big way to go for us, and let's say in the field as well to other customers. So I'm very curious about new developments. So that's what always keeps on ticking me.
Right. Thanks. So something practical thing. This webinar will be recorded, and the PDF will be made available afterwards within 24 hours. So you are able, as the audience, and we have a huge audience. I think over 250 people have registered for this webinar, and that's quite nice for this kind of summer period. So you can ask questions. So there are a few ways to do that. You see the chat function on the right-hand side. Everybody can watch this chat function and respond to that. But if you have questions to Jan or either me, please use the Q&A functionality. You see it on the right-hand side, Q&A bubble. If these questions are in line of the discussion Jan and I will be having, I will ask this question right away. If not, we have a Q&A at the end, and then we will make sure that these questions will be answered. So next, we also have, after this whole hour, an extra 30 minutes. So Jan and I will sit down in a virtual lounge at table 1. If you want to join us and have another further conversation about S&OP and that kind of topics, feel free to join us. As of now, I will put off my camera so you can enlarge your screen and we don't have any bandwidth problems and so forth. So next, as I said, I'm the architect of the SCM IT subway map. Since 2011, I create this overview of supply chain software vendors around the world who have offices in Europe. So that's one of the criteria. And you can enlarge it, and maybe people have seen it already, hopefully. There are a lot of software lines: ERP, WMS, TMS, and also SNOP, and that's and so forth and so on. So based on implementations, number of implementations, revenue size, they will get a subway station on a line or not. So that's what we do. And I will enlarge it to position also Slimstock on it. So Jan, you're also a vendor of SNOP software solutions. What do you see in the market?
Well, what we see, Martijn, I think people are still looking for, let's say, vendors with good track records, and I think the approach to them, I think, is quite relevant, because everybody's talking about new techniques, new AI infrastructure, etc. But I think it's still relevant. Where is a company coming from? Where are they going? What's the roadmap? So I see a lot of developments over there, but I think you see the same, right? That a lot of people are, let's say, buying maybe other companies or increasing their portfolio, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So now we do a lot of surveys every year, every half year, actually. So we do it for Europe and we do it for the Netherlands. And basically, when you ask supply chain directors, what is your highest needs? Then they answer sales and operations planning, and we need some tooling and support. We will talk about that later in depth. So that's what we hear from them. But also they are in need of visibility because of the turmoil in the world. And also sustainability is high on their agenda. Why CSRD is going to happen. for publicly traded company, but also to the suppliers and the logistics service providers. So visibility is on their map. Risk management is on their map. Transport management is in high need. That's interesting to see. But when you ask what are vendors actually implementing with their customers, forecasted demand planning and inventory management as a whole is number one.
Yep.
That's your world and where you come from Slimstock. TMS is number two. Supply chain risk management is also being adopted quite highly. Visibility is number four among the implementations mentioned by vendors, and SNOP and IBP is on number five. So that's you see some differences in what the supply chain audience wants and needs, and what's actually happening. When you're opening a new warehouse, you do need a warehouse management system, and with SNOP, yeah, you can postpone it and to say, okay, we are working with Excel, just do it a half year or a year longer if you don't get the budget. Okay, now Slimstock. So your heritage is in inventory management.
Yeah.
But your portfolio has evolved also on SNOP and even product management, not on scheduling, but on a high level capacity planning. That's also your fit, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. If you see, I think later on in the webinar we'll talk about, let's say, the science part. I think Slimstock is definitely coming from the science, so it's about calculating, let's say, inventory management parameters. So how much should I order? When should I order? On top of that, we go into, let's say, forecasting replenishment. Then we go into SNOP and touching the IBP part. And then, as like you said, the manufacturing, let's say, scheduling part is also something that we always said we won't go in there. But if questions coming along from customers at the end, yeah, it makes us going into the direction as well. Especially if you see, let's say, end-to-end planning, like you said, Martijn. We don't go into, let's say, visibility areas, but in this whole area, there's so much, let's say, yeah, so much going on at the moment. Yeah, for us, it's a very strategic point to move up in this part.
Yeah. So your heritage, you know, I know Slimstock already since the 90s. So based on your heritage is statistical forecasting based on a year of data on SKU level, and you will recognize the statistical patterns, different kind of statistical patterns, to be sure what to order and when and how much. That's the basis.
Yeah.
And that's really operations research, and that's really science. So that's the heritage. And now you evolved, and now you have launched, I think, an SNOP add-on in the last.
It's more like a layer,
years.
right? It's on top of, because we still do, let's say, the statistical forecasting part. Still, if you look back in time, wholesale companies, let's say, all over the world, but also retailers, e-com companies, but also, let's say, manufacturers are using Slim4 as a forecasting and replenishment tool.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, if you make the right, let's say, aggregations and you put your budget in, then it maybe is going to look like a little bit like SNOP, and then we're going to, let's say, move up into, let's say, demand planning. That's a whole different area. And I think, like I said in the beginning, I'm very curious. I want to know how this works. And I see at a lot of companies, they do a lot within Excel, within Power BI, but from my perspective, it can be done within our tooling. So that's where we're going.
Yeah. All right. Now let's look at the world. So we step back, and this is a slide I've been, presenting and changing and updating since 2020. So basically, I won't go through it in depth, but everybody can read it. You know, look at the numbers. These are kind of black swans, and COVID was a real black swan. And with the ripple effects like lockdown, shortages, bullwhips, you can read it, and leading to recession in the end. The war in Ukraine over 2 years ago in February 24th happening. So that's also for a lot of companies and a lot of countries was a black swan, not for the Ukraine itself and the US Army. They have done a lot of scenarios already beforehand. And as of last year, October, Gaza conflict is happening, and it's all kind of consequences. The Red Sea, and still happening now. CSRD, might be a surprise
big
for
thing, Martijn, CSRD, it's a big thing. I think everybody underestimated.
Yes, absolutely. So the sustainability part. So the publicly traded companies, they need to do something this year to do the reporting, start reporting, and they have to, as of next year, show numbers to the accountants, the Deloitte of this world. But as an effect, the publicly traded companies will ask all their suppliers to give scope 3 data. So it's also a domino effect, a ripple effect. So even logistics service providers are forced to get data on the CO2 carbon emission. So that's and that for a lot of companies that is a black swan. My question to you, there will be new black swans. What are your prediction of the next black swans?
If we know that, Martijn, we have to go to the casino, but I think it will be in the last slides, right? To place your bets.
Well,
it's hard to say. I see now. Maybe it's on the financial part, because I see, let's say, what's happening with this inventory value still all over, let's say, Europe. Let's say, in my perspective, with everything is happening over there, maybe it's on that side, but we don't know, right? Because if, for example, Trump will be elected in November, who knows what's next for us in Europe? Who knows?
No, I think that Trump could be a black swan, and it's hardly
Yeah.
a black swan, because it's likely. I don't hope so, but it's likely he will be elected.
Yeah.
And it will have consequences about trade wars with China, etc., all kind of stuff.
Yeah.
This morning
Sure.
I was reading extensive article about the Spratly Islands, and the Spratly Islands are on the coast of the Philippines, and now Chinese and Philippine Navy are are hassling about it. So there's a lot of gas underneath the Spratly Islands and other stuff. So that could be also another black swan. So these are the things, and Taiwan, of course, could be a black swan. So, but I think, and that's why I show this, supply chain functions, supply chain officers, supply chain professionals should be aware. And most of them are aware, because, but they should be prepared to be, not caught by surprise with all these kind of elements.
But also hard to say, Martijn, because for example, we're a CO2 with the whole, let's say, transition of this energy, where this is going. You see also the change of rules during time.
Yeah.
Let's say within SNOP, within, let's say, thinking in scenarios, I think it's more relevant than ever, because all these things are happening. But 9 out of 10, I will see, and we're going to discuss that later on, that everybody is like working in daily to daily business, right? And you keep on telling these kind of things for a couple of years already, but I think a lot of people still don't recognize the importance of thinking about these topics.
Yeah. So someone is, in the chat functionality, mentioning that Spratly Islands already happening for over 20 years, and Tom Clancy it has managed to put it in a computer game. So these kind of things, yeah. So in the gaming world, you already see, looking forward, especially with Call of Duty and that kind of games, what could happen in 2030, what kind of wars, etc. So there's also an environment to look for possible black swans, etc.
Yeah.
And I think we talk about later about the horizons of planning, horizons of SNOP and IBP. We should look ahead and be prepared. But that's one thing. All right. So next, looking about happening, and we talked about the black swans. But what kind of disruption do you mention and do you see in your world?
Well, I think for everybody who's working in supply chain is buying stuff from the Far East, I think everybody knows what's happening with the prices of this container prices. What's happening at the moment is like daily to daily business. I spoke yesterday with the supply chain director of fast moving consumer goods, and they're still negotiating about terms of next month. Well, that's something that's really strange in this world. But like I said in the middle, like we said, Martijn, working in supply chain will never be boring again, right? I think for us, we keep on tracking supply chain for a long time, because this is happening every day, all over again. Whether it be, let's say, something in the supply chain from, let's say, the shipping part, but also, and I think that's something that you see very good in the, let's say, the scale up startup part of supply chain companies, is the AI machine learning part, right?
Yep. Yeah. We are also presenting most of the times in this kind of webinars. What are the topic CEOs are talking about? And there's a nice overview. I don't have it here, but you can look it up. There's a German company who's creating this quarterly overview. What are the CEO topics mentioned in quarterly earning calls? Quite interesting to see. And supply chain has been on that overview since 2020, since the start of COVID, and since 1.5 years ago, out of nowhere, ChatGPT as a phrase was on there. So Gen AI is on there, AI is on there. So yeah, ChatGPT is also kind of black swan.
Yeah.
It's out of nowhere. It's traveling all around the world, and now we talk about AI or Gen AI, and there's a huge difference. We talk about it later. So that's also disruptive. And
Yeah,
are you
sometimes
also?
some things are on short term, right? Because I think price fluctuations or let's say AI is coming up. Some things are, let's say, if you look to the Gartner, let's say, things that are coming through us. Some things you can really see and you can maybe act to it. But for example, if we talk about reshoring, it's not so easy to maybe move your production facilities from the Far East into Turkey, right? To
No.
let's say to select a new supplier and say, yeah, well, this is cheaper or better for me, and that changes from tomorrow. So it's also a hard thing for supply chain directors to let's say to get your head around it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That it's a short term, like price fluctuation, the inflation, and the long term. Reshoring is happening already for the last decade, but we have done some surveys the last 2 years. It's accelerating, so the reshoring is accelerating. But onshoring or onshoring new suppliers in your system with quality assurance and such a things, these are hard. So China will remain the factory of the world, but that will change. So, but that takes time. Climate
Yeah,
change,
yeah,
yeah, it's long term, but now what you see, things are happening with storms, with flooding, Panama drying up, Panama Canal. So yeah, it's hard to see how to distinguish the short term and the long term.
yeah. I think you mentioned it last year that maybe there was some manufacturer that has no oxygen, and maybe it's in India or whatsoever, that they have to close down the factory because there
Yeah,
was not enough oxygen, right? So all this kind of stuff, it's happening, and yeah, well, think about it. And if you're still worrying about the daily to daily business with your, let's say, to be not to be rude, but on SKU level, how much to order for next week, yeah, that's still relevant. But I think supply chain or maybe to think about alternative scenarios is, I think, is more relevant than ever, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, we talk about sales and operations planning, so we talk about planning, and
Yeah,
planning
yeah,
means looking ahead. So that's one thing. So all these elements you mentioned, worth considering, mainly also because sales and operations planning is often confused about the short term, what should demand and supply matching, but actually there's a longer horizon to discuss.
yeah, yeah,
Someone is mentioning black swan CBAM. Yes, I have this
yeah,
similar overview with the ripple effects, and instead of CSRD I've mentioned the CBAM. Yes, CBAM is also quite of a new flavor. If you are importing aluminium from out of Vietnam into Europe, yeah, you'll get some high import duties based on CBAM, and that will be extended, and
yeah,
maybe what will happen, that will be maybe extended more and more. You see already EU with China discussing import duty because of electric cars into Europe, and that has also a counterpart of exporting stuff, milk and meat to China. So these are highly in effect, and we should consider that. When you look about getting into deep more of sales and operation planning, what do you see happening if you look at that part?
Martijn, I think if you work at a long time, let's say in 15 years, you see, let's say, the upcoming part. It's about working capital. We said, well, inventory has to go down. We see a couple of years ago, it's more about efficiency. It's about all these kind of topics, scarcity. The thing is that over time, I see portfolios, let's say, increasing. I see more volatile demand, warehouses all over Europe. So let's say from supply chain perspective, I think it's getting more complex. There is more data than ever, and the number of decisions you have to make, I think it's more than ever, right? And you have all these tools, you have all these reports, you have all these possibilities within any software tool. And I think within our customers, it's still sometimes you have to go back to basics, but sometimes it's also good to make decisions or to keep a little bit of a helicopter view, to look to your supply chain and see where you are really busy with, because otherwise you will end up with a lot of, let's say, detailed or maybe customization in your supply chain. But sometimes it's, you have to bring it to a new normal, to next level, right? We are talking always about, let's say, portfolio management. I think both of our maybe favorite topics. Everybody's thinking and talking about it, but in the meantime, I still don't see any rationalization, right? It's all about more.
Yeah, and interesting to see, when COVID was happening, the FMCG company were forced to cut down their portfolios, to cut down their number of SKUs, because there was a shortage of raw materials, packaging, and you name it. So basically, they just produced the essentials, and I think that Unilever cut off 60% of their portfolio during COVID.
Yeah.
But when COVID faded away, the SKUs turned back. So that's a surprise. So basically, we couldn't keep the cut down of SKUs after COVID. So that's what we see. And now proliferation of SKUs is still happening.
But also phasing in, phasing out, Martijn. I just visited a big importer of bicycle parts, and they have more over, let's say, 12 euro pallets with stuff they were never going to sell again, but they bought it last year. Nobody said, well, I think we should phase it out sometime.
No, yeah. No, so it's more, and that's creating a lot of complexity, data, and but also decisions.
Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to keep the, let's say, the big decision with the, let's say, small decision, high impact to small impact, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes if you add just one extra product to your 10,000 range of SKUs, well, how difficult can it be? But if you open a new flagship store within China, and you move up abroad, I think that's more complex, right? Or let's say the impact of that is even bigger. Yeah. And then maybe it's good. I'm not going to say that SNOP or IBP is going to solve all this kind of trouble, but you have to think more on the long term, and maybe on the high impact decisions that you have to make.
Yeah. I think the complexity is one thing. I think that companies should reduce complexity. And that starts with their portfolio. So that's the whole discussion on.
Yeah, but also in your, let's say, if you look to the ecosystem, Martijn, that you made last year, if you look to a supply chain ecosystem, it's not. Yeah, how complex can it be? Can you say? But if you really write it down, that's a big blueprint, right?
Yeah. So since the last 2 years, we created an ecosystem visualization. So normally companies would visualize their supply chain from raw material to the end customer from left to right, and it's linear. But when you actually visualize it, it's like a cloud, like a SimCity cloud of all kind of elements. All kind of stakeholders, but also the banks, the Nielsen of this world, NGOs, and you name it. But also 3PL companies, freight forwarders, and different kind of segmentation. So if you really visualize it, you get an oversight of what are we talking about. And this is our ecosystem, and we have competing ecosystem of our competitors. We have competing ecosystem adjacent to us. Yeah. In need of the same raw materials. So yes, so we have to visualize it, and the data. We're getting more and more data. But also, you are been around for a while, and so the statistical forecasting is relying on 1 year of data. But how useful is the data during COVID? Yeah. And what can you do with this kind of data?
Well, we have this. I think there's one great example, Martijn. We have one company who sells, let's say, sport prizes, medals, and all these cups. Within COVID, there was no event, right? So there is no data. And at the other end, we have this, let's say, companies who maybe can open their stores, or maybe they can do something with a pick-off moment. They have real uncertain demand in that area. Yeah, that's quite hard. Let's say the first thing that comes into my mind, I would say it's useless, but you have to start somewhere, right? Maybe it's the year before that, or maybe you have to have closer buckets or whatsoever. You have to make decisions, because just rely on the 12 months within COVID, keep on track on that data. It's not, you cannot start with it. I think it's quite impossible. But sometimes you have to make, let's say, a starting point.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, well, and that's maybe one good thing from, let's say, an S&OP perspective. If you have a budget and you go into, let's say, real demand planning, and you start with, well, we're going to expect that we're going to sell maybe 10 million in this area on that, let's say, particular product group, that's a starting point. And then you have to disaggregate or whatsoever, but then we're more, let's say, in the solution part already.
Yeah.
But it's quite hard for companies to keep on track of this kind of stuff, and how reliable is your data. But we both know, if you look into, let's say, for example, MOQs, lead times, whatsoever, we can also write a book on that part, on, say, how correct is your data, right?
Yeah.
Not even statistical data, but just master data. It's also horrible.
Yeah, we don't go there for now. And there's a nice question for the audience. I will address it later, because
Yeah.
we will address it in a few slides from now.
Cool.
So, AI is hot, and a lot of companies talk about machine learning. Maybe this cartoon on the left says something. So what's your point on with that?
Yeah, well, Martijn, I think we both agree on, if we put, let's say, AI, supply chain planning, S&OP in our topics, then I think the audience is fully booked, right?
Yeah.
But I think we have to keep on track that, let's say, from the old days, maybe statistics, that's where we're coming from. Then we put a nice frame, let's say, a nice front end on top of it. Then we say, well, maybe this is machine learning, and then we present it as, this is AI.
Yeah.
And what I see often is that people on the right side think that you put data in an AI model and you get some value out of it, but it's a really, really hard way of, let's say, data science part, engineering, modeling, to create some value. And I think that's something to keep in mind, right? And I think you see that. I think we prepared this slide both. I think you have a great, let's say, a way of, let's say, going back in the 80s, right, with the statistics part.
Yeah. About machine learning, I did a workshop in 2019 with the whole management team of a well-known manufacturing company. At the end, the CEO came to me and asked me, we want to apply machine learning, and I answered with a question. Okay, what does the machine want to learn, and based on which data, and for what purpose? Well,
Yeah.
he didn't have a clue. So that was the fad of the day in 2019, and still, maybe it's now Gen AI. So machine learning means you have to have data, to learn the engine, to learn the machine, and then make some use out of it. And then and that's also depicted on the right hand side. Yeah, there's a whole data science behind it.
Yeah, I think we can both do another webinar on this topic only, because I think it's a great way of, let's say, new possibilities. But we have to, let's say, keep it sometimes not always back to basics, right? Because I think there are a lot of things that we are really on a tipping point of getting it really into a good use. But I think the opportunity cost and the implementation cost and getting the real value out of it, I think you are right. Put real data, or let's say more data than you ever will have, maybe on, let's say, more companies to create some real value. And I think that's that's coming. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think you're right. We are on a tipping point. In 5 years from now, we will see that the usage of this kind of tools will be more applied, etc. But there are some hurdles to be taken. So we get to the title of this webinar, and maybe you can explain the science part first.
Yeah, Martijn, I think we both can agree. Let's say, if you look into supply chain management, and I know it back from my study days, it's all about statistical forecasting. It's all about calculating. It's about the ones and the zeros. It's an objective part. So the part where Slimstock, or let's say 9 of 10 supply chain companies are coming from, is the science part.
Yeah.
I made a little bit of blue. If you look to the color test, I think a lot of people are very, very blue on this part, and that's not a bad thing. I think that's recognizing patterns, making rules, but all based on, let's say, empirical evidence. So it's really science based. And I think if you give it one shot to the art part, I think if you look to, let's say, where for example, if you talk to not supply chain planning, but to sales, then it's more like, say, I won't say they're making art, but the thing is that I want to express it's about a feeling, it's about emotions, it's about let's say an older way of, let's say, looking to some of the, let's say, not problems, but some of the things that have to be solved. So the science and the art part, I think this is a way of, let's say, explaining why it's sometimes difficult to implement, let's say, SNOP or change management, doing change management, all this kind of stuff. I think this is everybody within supply chain should understand this science art part. It's objective versus subjective. So somebody is making an Excel, a Power BI dashboard, and they are really right about the analysis. But if your sales director says, well, I don't agree because I think this customer will be doing this and this in the next month, then you have maybe, it's a difference between getting right and having the right, let's say, follow-up, right? It's a whole different perspective. And the science art part, I think that's a good way of explaining why SNOP is not always working, or let's say sometimes difficult to explain, because you have to have more people on the table and with different backgrounds, with different whys, with different KPIs, with different expectations. And for us, this, let's say, for me, this is a way to explain the science and art part of the topic of this webinar.
Yeah. It's an answer to the question, why so many firms are failing to adopt sales and operations planning.
Yeah.
And I think, a lot of people say sales is an art. And a lot of marketeers, they come up with commercials. That's all more art. It's expression. It's extrovert. So that's, totally agree with this. That's the art part. I think that science part, it's more like the introverts. The supply chain people. I've studied operations research. Well, that's definitely science.
Absolutely.
Luckily, I've never applied to these algorithms, but I have learned them.
But you know how it works, right? I think you can.
Yeah. And maybe that's the thing. Sales and operations planning should bring this science and art together.
Yeah.
And if not, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And maybe also, I think, on the left-hand side, the science part, financial people are also more likely to be introverts and more science-oriented. But, so we, on one hand, we should, as supply chain people, we should find alliances internally with your financial people to make it work.
Yeah.
And on the other side, we should talk the language of sales and marketing and these kind of projections and expectations.
For us, it's we'll talk about it within a couple of minutes. But if you see, sometimes if you just invite not only your supply chain peer, but you want to talk with finance, or you ask a sales guy or girl to join the meeting, it sounds so simple, Martijn, but to put everybody on the table and to put this kind of topics on, there will be like, now I understand what you mean, right? And I think that's the whole thing about, let's say, changing the company, or let's say maybe SNOP is more change management than it's implementing a tool, right? The tool is just a way of getting the data real fast, but to get everybody on the table, I think that's the art. That's the real art.
And pre-COVID, there was a lot of discussion about one number planning. Get to one number, so we don't have any discussion internally. Is it the right number? Are we talking about the same forecast, etc., etc.? We moved away, and now one number planning. Now it's more, especially since COVID, we should talk about scenarios, and we talk about some different kind of futures and expectation. So the one number planning part was, to me, on the left-hand side, but since COVID, we see all kind of black swans and all kind of disruptions, and we move from the left side more to the right side, different kind of scenarios, different kind of futures and expectations. So, and I think, supply chain people should be aware what makes marketing people tick and the sales people tick. And we should rely on them. Otherwise, we don't have right forecast. We don't have any input of, usable forecast.
Yeah, exactly, Martijn. You will be wasting so much time with, let's say, if you don't have the right set of numbers, or you always disagree on, let's say, well, this is not my, let's say, portfolio whatsoever. It's always, sometimes just to prepare it. I think a lot of things is about preparing, right? And if you bring it together, I think you can achieve even more than you think. But yeah, sometimes it's good to put these kind of things in perspective, because yeah, I think let's say especially for Slimstock, where we come from the science part, we all think within the software that you are right. But if you don't talk to the business, to the real forecast, to the real demand, I think it's quite hard to get the right inventory in, right? Then it will be let's say walking around in circles.
And one thing, during our S&OP conference last year, we discussed some findings that a lot of supply chain planners are overriding the suggestions from tools, and 80% of these manual overrides by planners, was counter effective.
Yeah,
basically was wrong. So basically, 80% of this override of overruling the suggestions by a tool like Slim4 and the likes was plainly wrong. So some Excel professionals, who are know more about Excel than we do together, they think they got it right. They make Excel
yeah,
as an art.
yeah. I see
But
that. Yeah,
but you have to be careful. So basically, 80% of the forecast or the suggestions you shouldn't touch.
yeah, I agree. I think we you have to yeah, sometimes you don't want to interrupt in this kind of things. And I think it's more about thinking on business rules level or on different setups than on, let's say, yeah, changing one forecast on, let's say, one SKU. Yeah, it will be maybe an exception, but it will be a very hard one to keep on track on that kind of things.
So what I see, if companies are applying this kind of tools in the right way and know what you shouldn't touch, then these planners have more time and more room to step back. What does these numbers mean? And go to marketing and sales. Is it right? What is your input? So by implementing these kind of tools on the left hand side, do their thing, do their job, and automate it, and we'll see a lot of things happening with AI in the near future. When you have automated that for 80%, you can look at the outliers, the remaining 20%, and you have a better conversation. And then it's more the art part. So the supply chain planners have more time to discuss these outliers, this last 20% of the SKUs to be planned.
Yeah, I agree, Martijn. We have to stop wasting it. And maybe we go into the next slide. I think we waste a lot of talent and time. We waste a lot of opportunities, or we are too busy with all this stuff. Then there is no time left. And I think you see it from the last years. You made a lot of let's say you wrote a lot about, let's say, talent management, and I think that's quite relevant because everybody's screaming on new talents and they want to invest in them. But yeah, if you just walk into a company and you only will be working with Excel and you don't, yeah, you only are changing some of the parameters, I don't think that's the way forward.
No.
Same goes for, let's say, opportunities. If you have a spot buy or whatsoever, or new product introductions, feel free to, let's say, unlock time to think about this stuff. And at the end, yeah, well, resources. I think the most valuable thing is that we have, if you want to have a real, let's say, streamlined supply chain planning, yeah, you can improve so many things. But I won't say that again. It's not, S&OP is not going to solve everything, but I see it in daily practice that we waste too much of these things, and it's more a summary of, let's say, the things that I see that are happening on daily basis, and you can walk in every company, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but talent and time, for one thing. Time. When I talk to companies who are implementing SNOP as a process, and when I ask them how much time do you need to prepare a meeting, and we have a monthly cycle. You have 4 kind of meetings, starting with product review, and then you have demand review, and then you have supply review, and the financial review in week 4. Some companies, they spend so much time preparing these meetings. And that should be automated. That should be improved by tools. So don't waste too much to get the slides, to get the overviews of that. So that's one thing about time. And I think that will improve in the next few years when companies get this process right, know what they actually need to, to get better decisions.
Yeah.
That's and there's one thing. And you're right. I talk a lot about talent pipeline management. The well-known companies don't have any hard time to get new talents in. But what you will see after 1.5 year or 2 years, and especially when they get to the second or the third job, they move out. It's taken, in their opinion, it's taken too long to see improvement on
Yeah.
supply chain management, etc. And
Yeah, for the new talents, Martijn, I think we both see that if you hire new people with this new fresh way of looking at things to transform your company or to do new stuff, for them it's very logic, right? The new gen,
yeah,
for them it's in the whole new way of entering this kind of stuff. Where we are, let's say, very traditional, right? We are in the statistics part still, but for them it's just a way of changing things. And I think we should be more aware of this kind of stuff. And yeah, and put them, let's say, use the real talents, and
yeah.
not put it away somewhere in a, let's say, in a Power BI report or whatsoever.
Yeah, now one thing is I'm also talking about economic waves.
Yeah,
We're entering the next sixth wave of Kondratyev that will take 30 to 40 years, but we're leaving behind the fifth wave of computing, and it ended up all talking about efficiencies. Cost cutting, doing all things, especially pre-COVID. It was since the financial crisis of 2008 and beyond. In the next 12 years since 2008, it was all about efficiency. But what we will see right now, moving up in a new age, it's more about effectiveness.
yeah,
What is
yeah,
needed.
yeah.
We have cut down a lot of stuff, and you mentioned what's the use of an EOQ in the next decade?
Yeah, good question. I think if you look to the new part, but again, Martijn, then I think we will be running out of time if we touch that area. If you look to the new elements that are, let's say, Amazon is pushing on this kind of part, I think within a couple of years, nobody's thinking about these topics anymore.
No, no. No, and a working capital, I think that's an important part, because some companies, some supply chain directors ask me, how to sell a new tool to the board. And, don't talk about SKUs, don't talk about inventory, talk about working capital reduction. And that's the
Yeah,
magic word, because why?
yeah,
Finance people are talking about working capital and working capital reduction. So what I noticed that marketing and salespeople are way better selling a Gen AI project to the board than supply chain people. And it's
yeah,
also, it has to do with something, bluffing your way into the board with working capital reduction. And I've seen it companies who've taken out 100 million euros on working capital by implementing SNOP within a year. So
yeah,
and that's so the magic word working capital reduction. These are the magic phrases how to sell SNOP to your board
yeah,
or to your CFO. And
yeah,
we're getting into the budget time in the next month. So if you want to sell it to the board, just promise them a working capital reduction of 100 million, or in your number, 10 million, whatever. And it's out there. There's so much stuff in your
yeah,
warehouses.
yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So so what, when we talk about science and art, so what is the core issue about all this?
Ha, good question, Martijn. I think, yeah, we both know and we both see, let's say, long term, we discussed it this morning. I think the planning part is all SNOP, it's a real team effort, right? And I think it makes it more difficult if you look cross-functional. Because if you start with sourcing and you talk to finance and you have to connect it with, let's say, everybody in this circle, I think this is the quite the most, let's say, the key element of implementing this right, or let's say get everybody on the table on meetings that they prepared and that everybody wants to join.
Mm-hmm.
That makes I think I try to explain it simple, but if you want to get this thing moving, then you have to get your technology right. We touch the topic of the tool, that's fine, but it's just providing data. You have to have your processes right, and you have the right people on the table. And I see it sometimes it's it's maybe for people too big to start. I will talk about it tomorrow at the trend dinner about how to start, but I think this is the key element to connect everybody, to have a let's say a real team effort with, let's say, no conflicts, no let's say in the magical triangle about cost, service, and capital, to get everybody aligned. I think that's the trick question, to get everybody aligned over there.
Yeah.
And I think you've seen enough examples where this is not happening, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was interviewed by the Dutch Procurement Association, and 5 years ago, and they were asking what is the hottest topic in supply chain management. Well, that's sales and operations planning. And lo and behold, procurement management, sourcing, buyers, 9 out of 10, they are not involved in SNOP.
No, they have
If you
no clue
ask,
what it is, right?
no,
They have
no. If you ask a procurement manager within a manufacturing company what is SNOP, I hope that he will understand
we both hope.
what SNOP stands for. And
Yeah.
we had a discussion last year at our conference. Within finance, there's a process called financial planning and analysis, and also 4 steps, and looks quite similar to IBP or SNOP. So if you know that, you can address this to the finance people. You have a similar process like IBP, that's called financial planning analysis, and sit down with them. What's your language? What's your lingo?
Yeah.
And that's how you get them at the table. And
Absolutely.
sales and marketing have product introductions, and they have their plans. And you have to sit down with marketing people. So when do you introduce this new product, and what do you expect from it? So, and maybe that's the part. Maybe supply chain people are the ones starting out this SNOP process implementation, but later on it's getting IBP, and then probably finance is more involved.
Yeah.
The trick question also with I also ask people, are you doing SNOP or IBP? No, we do IBP. And I ask them, does your finance people rely on your data? No, they have their own processes. They have their own data. Okay, then it's not IBP you're doing. That's still sales and demand matching.
Yeah.
And that's fine to begin with. Yeah. And R&D part, that's kind of new. So, but that's also about product introduction, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's one step before that, right? And I think in if you took a typical wholesaler, I think it's not relevant. But if you look to, let's say, bigger companies, they must be aligned somewhere in the process. It cannot be true that R&D is fixing some kind of stuff, or let's say making new versions of whatsoever. It should be relevant, but it should be on the right level within your company, right? Because otherwise you will be sticking into too much of detail. And I think we're going there to, let's say, the execution part. 9 out of 10, all these meetings will be, but this item was not on stock because let's say an incident on execution level. That's all fine, but I think the next trick question is to keep this kind of meetings on the right level. Talk about the value that everybody understands, and it's not on too much of a high level, right? I think it's not about the year-on-year budget on total level. It's on a real aggregation level that everybody agreed on, and I think this is also a quite important part to keep in mind, because otherwise you will end up with, let's say, a very strange way of meetings.
R&D, you talk about wholesale and R&D, but I had an interview with a supply chain director of a wholesaler in solar panels.
Yeah.
And in that field, they are now stuck with a lot of solar panels in Western
That's
Europe.
True. If you go to the Rotterdam area, there's still a lot on the K, for sure.
Yeah. So basically, even if you are a wholesaler, you have to be aware what has been developed, what's in the pipeline on solar panels and on heat pumps. So that's the R&D part you should be aware of. Maybe you don't have an R&D department within your company, but you should be aware what your supplier is developing on new products and what's happening in the world.
I agree. If you go to real end-to-end planning, if you want to say go into real supply chain management, I think you are right. Then it's part of the let's say, it doesn't matter if you're wholesaler or
and even more and more wholesalers are introducing their own brand or do some packaging, whatever. They do some added value, so they won't be manufacturing companies, but they add some process steps,
Yeah.
and that's also some development.
Yeah.
You discussed about S&OE and S&OP. Maybe we should go into there to explain what's the difference.
Yeah, I think, Martijn, 9 out of 10, if we talk of, let's say, supply chain planning, in my opinion, it's about a longer horizon. And if you look to the execution part, that's real on, let's say, how much should I order for the next lead time, but it's from let's say, the customer perspective, right? So from now until, let's say, the next 3 months or whatsoever, you can divert it on the different verticals, but the S&OP, so the planning part, is on a longer planning horizon, and it's different from the execution part. And I think you should be very good aware of where you kind of split it and in what kind of vertical or industry you're in, because I think that can be different. But those are the things that you really have to keep in mind, because execution, it's fine. It's let's say matching demand and supply, and we both know on this item level we are shortened, so we have to find an alternative supplier, and we have to get some new inventory in. Fine, but if you look to, let's say, even bigger changes, or let's say the scenarios where we start the story with, I think the planning part is also more, it's based on science, but it's getting more and more art here.
Yeah. So basically you are visualizing a picture of opening up new factories, new warehouses.
Yeah.
In the long term, 1 year from now, 2 years from now, and that's the S&OP planning part, and you get more in the art department maybe, and visualizing stuff, scenarios, etc.
Yeah, if you're a big, let's say, a big retailer opening new stores in new country, the execution part is just filling in the inventory for the right orders, etc. But if you're starting with this, let's say, scenarios, or let's say initiatives or whatsoever, that's more on the longer term. You expect and you think and you assume a lot of things, and then the closer by you will get, then it will be getting more execution.
Yeah. So there's also a phrase called the frozen period. So basically, in the S&OE execution area, that's the frozen period. You fix your demand, and you know what to produce.
It's for the next
to
lead time,
buy.
right? It's what every supply chain planner is doing every day. How much should I order for the next delivery? And then you talk about EOQs, lead times, etc.
Yeah, and basically, getting back to the question why a lot of S&OP processes failing. What I see, they talk too much about the execution part. So
Sure.
they started out as an S&OP planning process, but they end up talking about next month delivery. And that's also why a lot of companies are failing in S&OP, because they don't make a distinction between an S&OE environment process and S&OP.
Correct.
And you stay away from the short term. And you should a different kind of meeting over there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think we're moving up to the next, maybe next slide. If you took, for example, if you're just a real sales-driven company and you are short on Q3, then I think it's quite hard if you run into an S&OP meeting and you are going to talk about the long term. I think everybody in that meeting understands, or at least it's quite obvious that you will discuss Q3.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to mention, if you're below budget and you have to put a nice initiative in to get out of it, that's fine. But still, I think it's hard to get everybody on the, let's say, like you said, get out of the daily business. And sometimes, or let's say, if you prepare it right, the elements are there, then you can set it up. But again, it's the pitfall is to fall in, let's say, the execution part, and just focusing on, well, this customer was complaining because we don't have this, let's say, XYZ item not on stock. Yeah.
So I got questions from my readers. So about the IT software map, they ask me now, there's software for S&OP. Is there software for S&OE? I say yes and no. Basically, your S&OE software is warehouse management, so WMS, TMS, order management, scheduling, that kind of stuff. So S&OE is a field where you execute, and it could be TMS, WMS, and you name it. So basically, there's no S&OE software as a whole. but that it's in the environment of WMS, TMS, order management,
Yeah, I think
scheduling.
there are some topics, right? If you look to supply chain, let's say management, supply chain planning, I think from the inventory replenishment part, I think we do S&OE. If you look to, let's say, WMS, TMS, or all these topics, for sure, OMS, there are so many of this S&OE, the execution part. That's a world on itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, we're running out of time. But what do you
Yeah.
see? What is the main challenge? And you mentioned a few here.
Yeah, I think Martijn, I think to summarize this sheet, I think everybody can read it afterwards. But I think to summarize it, I think if you don't prepare the meetings, there's no proactive collaboration between let's say the different departments. You can easily fall into any detail you want.
Yeah.
Maybe on a new product, maybe on, let's say, there is some shortage, maybe there is some discussion about container prices, maybe your sales is behind forecast or whatsoever. All these topics will become across if you don't you sometimes you don't have to do things, but I think it's quite hard to keep on track on this area, because otherwise you'll be easily falling into the detailed discussions. I don't think you want to be there in the SNOP meetings.
No, if you look at the slide, from the upper left to the lower right, a lot of them are focusing on the upper left. And new product introduction is also neglected with a lot of companies, and portfolio rationalization, optimization hasn't been doing well lately, since the SKU proliferation within a lot of companies. But the main thing is right on the lower right. That's I think that's the art part: collaboration, communication. So that's probably the main issue and focus on for S&OP success.
Yeah, and I think if you have short on time, I think Martijn, I think we have to keep on the track on the time. But I think the next slide, I think it's about making decisions, right? Where you put your time or where to place your bets, right? I think this is the, let's say, maybe a translation of the poker room, where you're sometimes thinking when you are in the board.
Yeah. So to explain this, what we're going to introduce in the SNOP roundtable, we're going to do in October with Slimstock, but also during our SNOP conference in November, we're going to use this. So basically, people get fake money to place their bets, and okay, you have 4 kind of reviews in your SNOP cycle, your monthly cycle. Yeah, I'm curious to see if you hand out tips to a demand planner and a financial person and a salesperson where to place their bets. Where should you focus on, invest, software-wise, time-wise, and you can read it yourself. But we're going to test this with a huge audience. They're going to place their bets, to put the fishes on the boxes. Say, okay, where should we focus on more than we do right now? And my prediction would be most of the fishes will end up in section 2, demand review, and some of supply review. But product review will be neglected by supply chain people. That's my prediction. And finance, will leave it to finance. So that's to see. And if you ask it to other people involved, of finance or marketing and sales, I'm curious to see where they want to place their bets. All right. Yeah, there are some Q&A. There are some questions here. One question: is it the right order to control your S&E to have time for SNOP?
Good question. I think you, to be honest, if the SNOE is still not there, I think you don't have to start with SNOP. I think you mentioned it in the beginning, Martijn. If your maturity is too low, you can start with SNOP, but where are you going to start? Then you're going to maybe aim for, let's say, the top 200 items or whatsoever. I don't see the real added value for that. But if you want to have a check in the box and start with SNOP, that's fine. But I fully agree on this part. I think you have to start with SNOE for sure.
Yeah, if your SNOE is like the firefighting mode, and if you are still there and not able to prevent fires anyway, you're still in the firefighting mode, and that's SNOE. But you have to get beyond that, otherwise you won't get there. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but the good news is we still have another 30 minutes after write this. So we still have 1 minute left, and so right after this, Jan and I will sit down at table 1. You can join us, and there are more questions we are not able to answer right now. This is how Slimstock can help. So you can read it yourself. So you do a lot of stuff to help out. You created also an SNOP community.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of roundtables. In the Netherlands, we have a SNOP roundtable coming up at a customer site, so that will be of interest. And here to wrap up, so here are the links. The IT software map. There's a readiness scorecard by Slimstock. There's an interesting white paper with Columbus setting out sail to conquer new worlds. And you have published an SNOP book available, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote it in the, let's say, in the Trend interview of last summer, Martijn. I think the book is fine, but you cannot learn it from reading the book. It's more like, let's say, to as a background to learn the fundamentals and talk in the same language. So if people are interested in the book, feel free to drop a message or afterwards connect on LinkedIn. I'll make sure that you'll get a copy of it.
So like I mentioned, we will organize an SNOP conference in the Netherlands, in the center of the Netherlands. Slimstock will be involved. We have nice speakers from FMCG companies who are already applying, testing out Gen AI and planning. We'll discuss about it. We'll discuss also about how to connect with finance. We'll also discuss how to get more external data into your SNOP tooling and processes in discussion. So that will be happening on the November the 20th in the Netherlands. With this, Jan, I would like to thank you for this interesting conversation.
Yeah, thanks. Likewise, Martijn. I liked it a lot, and maybe it's fun. I thought it was 30 minutes, and I think we had enough way of discussing, and we are now 61 minutes across. So I think maybe it's good to have another one next time, right?
Yeah, we will. It's not. There will be not the last time we'll talk about sales and operations planning, and it's good to see that we have an overall theme. And I hope that we'll get cut across that it's a combination of science and art. And I think that supply chain people should more focus on the art side to get things going and get all the people at the table. Thank you for the audience. Thanks for now. And with this, I would like to thank you, and hopefully we'll see you later in the lounge. Or we have a next webinar Wednesday coming up next week, and we'll talk about supply chain learning and development. Different kind of topics, also very interesting. For now, I'd like to thank you and say bye-bye, and I hope to see you later.
Bye-bye.